I won $1 million, but my mom wanted to take it away. Hi everyone. This story is about how winning the lottery turned into a family nightmare. I thought $1 million was the start of a new life. But everything went completely differently than I expected. My name is Jake, I'm 27, and I live in a small town. I work as a mechanic, rent an apartment, and, honestly, barely make ends meet. Let me briefly describe my mom. Our relationship has always been complicated. She's been controlling me for as long as I can remember. My dad left when I was 8, and ever since, she's constantly reminded me that I owe her for raising us on her own. Last week, I won the lottery. It was a random ticket I bought on my way home. And suddenly, jackpot, $1 million. At that moment, it felt like the world slowed down. My first thought was, I'll no longer live paycheck to paycheck. A new car, my own home, travel. It all became possible. I decided not to tell anyone yet, not even my best friend. I wanted to think about how to handle the money properly. But 2 days later, I got a call from my mom. Hi Jake, how are you? Her voice sounded too warm, like she knew something. Everything's fine, I replied. I heard you won the lottery, she said. My heart dropped. How did she know? I hadn't told anyone. Yeah, something like that, I reluctantly admitted. We need to discuss how you're going to manage the money, she said sharply. I immediately felt uneasy. This wasn't just an interesting conversation, it was the beginning of something very unpleasant. After her call, I put down the phone and just froze. One thought kept spinning in my head. How did she find out? I hadn't told anyone. Not even Tommy, my best friend, though we always share everything. It was my secret. But somehow it wasn't anymore. The next day, she called again. Jake, have you thought about what you're going to do with the money? She asked, as if it were her millions, not mine. I tried to stay calm. Mom, it's still fresh. I haven't decided anything yet. She immediately jumped in. I have an idea. I know how to use it wisely. We can buy a big house. There will be room for everyone. For you, for me, maybe even for your sister if she wants to come back. My sister? She hadn't spoken to Maggie in 2 years, but now, apparently, we all needed to live in some mythical house. I felt irritation rising inside me. Mom, this is not up for discussion. This is my money. There was a pause on the line, and then her tone changed. Jake, have you forgotten how much I've done for you? I raised you alone, worked tirelessly. Without me, you wouldn't have survived. That's always been her trick. It's like she keeps those years of motherhood in a bank of debts I'm now supposed to repay. I didn't ask you to do that, I blurted out. I immediately regretted those words. Her silence was worse than any shouting. Then she abruptly said, You're just ungrateful. But don't worry, Jake. We'll talk about this again. I realized this was only the beginning. That evening I checked my ticket again. It was still there, hidden in my desk drawer. But I didn't feel as happy as I did at first. Instead of dreaming about a new life, her voice kept echoing in my head. We'll talk about this again. I hadn't heard from Mom for a couple of days after her last call. Honestly, I thought she'd calmed down or at least decided to wait. But deep down, I felt this was just the calm before the storm. On Friday evening, I got home from work, tossed my keys on the table, and opened the fridge to find something to eat. That's when I heard someone knocking on the door. Bam, bam, bam. The knock was sharp, like the person outside was angry. I tensed up a little. When I opened the door, there she was. Mom stood on the threshold clutching her big bag, the one she always carried when she was ready for a long talk. Hi, Mom, I said, trying to look calm. What are you doing here? Well, you're not answering my calls, she said as she walked past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. She sat on the couch and looked around, inspecting the room like an inspector assessing its state. I closed the door, realizing it was going to be a long evening. You've really let this place go, she began, brushing dust off the armrest of the couch. How do you even live here? I crossed my arms over my chest. Did you come here to criticize my apartment or talk about something specific? Her expression grew serious. She set her bag aside, folded her hands on her lap and spoke. I want to talk about the money, Jake. I felt a knot tighten inside me. We've already talked about this. It's my money, and I'll decide how to use it. She leaned forward, as if she was about to tell me a secret. You're still too young to understand what to do with such sums. Money can destroy a person if they don't know how to handle it. Mom, that's not your concern, I interrupted. It is my concern, Jake. Because I'm your mother. Her voice grew louder, almost a shout. You have no idea how many sacrifices I made for you. Don't I deserve a little support? I didn't know what to say. On one hand, she really had done a lot to raise me. But on the other, this wasn't her money. I won it. Support is one thing, but trying to dictate how I should spend my money is another, I finally said. She jumped up, her eyes flashing. You don't even understand what I'm offering you. You're throwing away a chance to build something meaningful. I'm trying to help you. I felt my patience slipping away. Mom, it's my choice, and I'm not going to argue about it. If you can't accept that, then maybe you should leave. Her face tightened, but she quickly composed herself. She grabbed her bag, but as she left, she said, You'll regret talking to me like this, Jake. When the door closed behind her, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. What did she mean by that? After she left, the apartment was too quiet. I tried to relax, but her last words kept echoing in my head. You'll regret speaking to me like that. I tossed and turned all night, wondering what she meant. My mom had always been persistent, but when she wanted something badly enough, she could be relentless. Usually that trait was admirable, but now it was crossing dangerous lines. The next day at work started off normal, oil changes, diagnostics, and minor repairs. But by evening, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Texts, calls. When I finally checked, I saw a flood of messages from unknown numbers. Jake, we heard you won the lottery. Can you help me pay off my debts? Hey, remember me? We sat together in school. I have an idea for investing your money. Why aren't you replying? I'm your cousin. Don't you care about family? My head was spinning. Who were these people? How did they find out? And then it hit me. It was her. I knew my mom liked to talk, especially when she felt wronged. Clearly, she decided that if I wouldn't share the money with her, she'd make sure everyone else knew about it. When I got home, I found a surprise waiting for me. 2 neighbors, whom I usually just nodded to in passing, stood at my door. They smiled like they'd hit the jackpot along with me. Hi, Jake, Debbie, one of them, said. We just wanted to congratulate you. Thanks, I replied, trying not to sound annoyed. You know, my son's in college and struggling with tuition, she began. But I cut her off. Look, I'm really tired. Can we talk some other time? They left, but I could only think one thing. This is spiraling out of control. I locked the door, checked that my lottery ticket was still safe in my desk drawer, and realized I couldn't handle this alone anymore. The next day, I called Tommy. You won't believe what's happening, I said when he picked up. What's going on? Remember the lottery ticket I told you about? Now everyone knows. Everyone. Tommy listened quietly and then said, Jake, you need to do something about this. Like, get a lawyer or something. A lawyer? I asked, confused. Yeah, man. You don't understand how many people will try to take that money from you, especially your mom. His words felt like a prophecy, because that evening she sent me another message. It was short. Jake, if you won't talk, that's your choice. But you'll learn that money doesn't always bring happiness. After her message, I knew things were worse than I thought. That wasn't just a statement. It was a warning. The next day, my bank called. The operator said someone had tried to access my account using my personal information. My stomach dropped. Who was it? I asked, feeling a cold chill run down my back. We can't disclose that information, the operator said, adding. But it looked suspicious. We blocked the attempt and reinforced your account security. I hung up, already knowing who it was. As if to confirm my suspicions, my mom called a couple of hours later. Jake, she started in a falsely sweet tone. We're family. Isn't it hard to share a little with your loved ones? Share? You tried to break into my bank account. That's not what it looks like, she snapped. I just wanted to see what you're hiding. You don't even know how to handle that kind of money. Mom, this has gone too far, I said, struggling to stay calm. You can't just invade my life like this. I'm doing this because you're acting like a child, she shouted. You don't understand what you're doing. I'm trying to help you. If this is your idea of help, please stop, I replied, hanging up the phone. I was furious. Breaking into my account. This wasn't just a family argument anymore. It was something else entirely. Later that evening, I met up with Tommy to clear my head. We sat in his small studio, surrounded by guitars and rock posters. This is getting out of hand, man, he said, handing me a beer. Your mom is literally trying to steal your money. I don't know what to do, I admitted. I don't want to fight her, but she's crossing every boundary. Tommy thought for a moment. You need to put your foot down. If she sees you won't give in, maybe she'll back off. I wasn't sure if that would work. My mom wasn't one to back off. But I decided to try. The next day, I called her. Mom, I want to talk, but only if you agree to stop the manipulations, threats, and interfering in my life. Her voice was tense. Fine. What do you want to talk about? Let's meet at your place, I said. She agreed, but I knew this wouldn't be an easy conversation. I didn't know what to expect as I approached her house. Mom always had a way of making things feel tense, even when everything seemed normal. The door opened, and there she was, in her usual no-nonsense dress, her eyes full of determination. Hi, Jake, she said. But there was no warmth in her voice. I stepped inside, immediately hit by the scent of her perfume and freshly brewed tea. Despite the tension, she still maintained her usual cozy atmosphere. We sat on the couch in silence for a moment, the quiet heavier than her shouting from days before. What do you want to talk about? She finally asked, sitting rigidly as if I had come to waste her time. I took a deep breath. I want you to stop interfering in my life. This is my money, and I'm not going to let you take it. She didn't respond right away. Her lips trembled slightly before she steadied herself. She wouldn't let me see her crack. You don't understand, Jake. You don't know how hard it was for me. I raised you alone, kept a roof over our heads, worked nights so you'd have everything you needed. You have no idea how much I sacrificed. I sighed. We'd had this conversation so many times before. I knew how hard it had been for her, but that didn't mean she had a right to my money. Mom, I appreciate everything you did for me, but I'm an adult now. I can decide how to live my own life. Her face hardened, and I realized she wasn't going to back down. I can't just let this go, Jake. That money isn't just yours. You don't understand what you're throwing away. You have a chance to help me, to help all of us. We could start a new life. I felt frustration boiling up again. Look, I've already told you. It's not your money. I want it. I'll spend it the way I see fit. Her eyes flashed, and I knew she wasn't done fighting. You're ungrateful, Jake. You don't see that I'm trying to help you. You'll regret this someday. No, Mom, I said firmly. Your mistake is thinking I owe you for raising me. You don't get to control my life anymore, and I won't tolerate it. She stared at me in silence, and I could feel the tension in the room. Then she stood up, walked to the window, and stared outside. I thought she was calming down, but then she turned back and said, You'll come crawling back to me, Jake. You won't be able to handle this money on your own. You'll regret this. Her words hung in the air like a heavy weight. I stood there, unable to respond, as her determination burned in her eyes. Fine, Mom, I said. But if you keep pushing, I'll have no choice but to take further action. She said nothing, retreating to her room and leaving me standing in the hall. As I left her house, I felt a mix of relief and unease. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. A couple of days after I talked to my mom, I started to feel the tension rising around me. This wasn't just a mom who wants the best for me situation. She genuinely wanted something more. I could feel something brewing. My gut instinct didn't betray me. That evening, when I returned home, the first thing I noticed was that all the windows were closed, and the door wasn't locked as usual. Inside, it was dark. But I sensed someone was there. For a second, I thought it might be a friend who had just dropped by, but I couldn't figure out why no one opened the door. I stepped into the apartment and immediately felt something was off. On the table lay an envelope with my name on it, with no return address. I tore it open, and as I read the note, my heart skipped a beat. If you don't return the money, we'll make sure you'll never see them again. Your mother is in danger. Think about it, Jake. At first, it seemed like a stupid threat, but as I read the final words, realizing the threat was real, a cold sweat ran down my spine. This wasn't just about money. Someone knew. Someone was aware. And it seemed they were ready to take things further. I immediately dialed my mom's number. Her phone was off. Then I called again, and again. Nothing. I sprinted to her house. Thoughts raced through my mind. What if? When I got to her place, I noticed the door wasn't locked. I entered and saw her in the hallway. She was standing with her back to me, and in front of her stood a man. A tall man in a black jacket and dark sunglasses. I didn't know what to make of it. "Mom, what's going on?" I yelled, rushing toward her. She turned to me and said calmly, "Jake, I couldn't hide it any longer. This wasn't just your decision. I invested part of that money in something bigger. Into my business. You don't know who you're dealing with." My world turned upside down. Mom, involved with someone, with some business? And this money was part of something else. What did it mean? Why hadn't she told me anything? The man in dark glasses stepped toward me and said quietly, "Your money isn't just yours anymore. Now it's ours." My hand trembled as I gripped my phone, realizing I couldn't just walk away from this. I had to understand what was happening, or the consequences would be dire. I stood in the hallway, and the air felt so thick you could cut it with a knife. Everything was happening in slow motion. The man in the black jacket, who seemed like he'd just walked out of a crime movie, and my mom, who seemed like a completely different person. She wasn't the woman I knew. All I could see was her cold gaze, her harsh words, and that envelope, which now felt like a small piece of a much larger puzzle. I stepped closer to her, unable to believe what was happening. "Mom, who is this man? And what's this business? Why didn't you tell me? Do you understand what you've done?" I spoke faster than I could think, but it was too late. My mom didn't look guilty or scared. She was calm, but too calm. "You don't understand how this works, Jake," she said, her voice quiet, but firm. "I've been protecting you. I did everything to keep you safe, but you're in too much of a hurry to escape me." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flood her with questions, but instead, I just stood there, frozen. The man in dark glasses stepped closer to me, his gaze sharp like a blade. "You probably think you can fix this on your own, but you can't. The money is just the beginning. You have no idea who we're involved with. Your money is now ours, and your mother can no longer protect you." I stepped back. Something clicked in my mind. Why didn't I realize this earlier? Why didn't I start asking questions when these strange people began showing up in my life? This man, this woman, her cold gaze. It all made sense. They were part of something terrible. "What do you mean the money is ours? Are you part of some gang? What kind of game is this?" I couldn't hide my confusion and anger. The man smirked. "You're clever, Jake. Yes, it's not just about money. It's a business. And if you want to live in peace, you'll just have to agree." My mom stepped closer to me, her face nearly expressionless. "You can't just walk away from us. You don't understand what's happening, Jake. You've always been in our world. You just didn't know it. We owe people, and now you do too. And no amount of money will free you from this." My hand clenched into a fist. This wasn't just a fight with my mom. This was a threat. A real threat. I didn't know who to turn to, what to do, or who to trust. All I knew was that I couldn't just stand by and watch her sink deeper into this world while waiting for things to magically fix themselves. If you think I'll let you and this guy do something terrible to me and Mom, you're seriously mistaken, I said through gritted teeth, unable to hide my determination. The man didn't react to my words. He just looked at me as if I were an ant he could crush at any moment. But his gaze made me realize that if I didn't act now, the consequences would be horrifying. Mom silently turned and walked to her room. I didn't know what to think. My money, my chances for a new life. Everything was tied to this world I didn't know. And now I was part of this dark story. A real fight awaited me to escape this nightmare. I wasn't sure what was scarier. The moment I realized I'd been caught in some kind of whirlpool, or the moment I began to understand just how deeply my mother was tied to all of it. We had always lived by the rules she had set, and I'd grown used to relying on her strength. But now, she was part of something much larger and darker. One question echoed in my mind. How could she? The man in the black jacket stood motionless, while I tried to make sense of what was happening. I could have taken a step back, simply walked away. But not this time. This was bigger than just money. I couldn't leave my mother to face this alone. If she was in danger, I had to step in. Otherwise, I was nothing. I followed her into her room. She was sitting at the desk, trying to look calm, but her fingers trembled as she shuffled through some papers. She didn't look at me, so I decided to break the silence. Mom, what's going on? Who are these people? Why didn't you tell me? You're playing with fire. She raised her eyes. I saw a flicker of something in them before she quickly looked away. Jake, you don't understand. This was necessary. We owe people who don't give you a choice in how you repay them. If I hadn't agreed, you wouldn't even be alive. And this million, it was our last chance, for both of us. Her words hung in the air like a heavy weight. I struggled to process what she was saying. Part of me didn't want to believe it, but everything around me told me she wasn't lying. Suddenly she added, You've always been at the center of this, but you didn't notice. The debts, the deals, the people coming to take what's theirs. You can't even imagine the kinds of people I've had to deal with. I gripped the armrests of the chair tightly. So you're saying you were in debt? To criminals? You worked with them. Why didn't you tell me? We could have found another way. You wouldn't have understood. You were too young when it all started. When your father disappeared, I was left alone with you. I couldn't let us lose everything. This isn't just about money, Jake. It's about survival. But I never expected you to win such a large sum. That changed everything. I felt anger and disappointment growing inside me. Everything I thought I knew about my life was now a lie. I had always believed my mom made the right choices, that she couldn't be involved in anything bad. But here she was, the woman who had once set us on a dangerous path and now couldn't find her way off it. But then I noticed her calm demeanor vanish. Something new appeared on her face. Fear. Fear for both of us. You need to be careful, she said quietly. They're watching us. You have no idea what they're capable of. Do you think you can just refuse the money and walk away? You're wrong, Jake. Who are they, Mom? I asked, desperate for some clarity. People you don't want to meet, she replied, her voice filled with despair. You can't just return the money, because they'll demand more. And if you can't pay, they'll take everything we have, including our lives. That's when I realized this wasn't just about debt. These weren't ordinary creditors. These were people who used manipulation, threats, and control to get what they wanted. And I had no idea how to fight them. I looked at Mom again. What did she know? Who was her partner in all this? Why hadn't she told me sooner? The man in the black jacket finally spoke. We thought you wouldn't want to get involved, Jake. We thought you'd just take your money and leave. But now that you know everything, we can't just let you walk away. We have plans. You can't simply exit the game as if nothing happened. A chill ran down my spine. My mom had betrayed me. And now, if I didn't make a decision, I could lose everything. I was faced with a choice: fight, or simply give back what didn't belong to me. I looked at her and said, "So what now? What am I supposed to do?" I stood before my mom and this man, who was far more dangerous than I could have imagined. My mom was no longer the kind woman who had always supported me. I could feel how every step of this story was turning me into a pawn in someone else's game. That money had become a catastrophe, and all I knew was that if I didn't act decisively, I would lose everything. The man in the black jacket spoke again. His voice was low and calm, but it carried a threat that was impossible to ignore. "You can fight, Jake, but what if your fight costs your mother her life? Is that what you want?" His words hit me like a lightning bolt. I'd thought his threats were just empty words. But when you hear something like that from someone who clearly has power, you start to understand the stakes are much higher than you'd ever imagined. I looked at my mom. She stood off to the side, as though she no longer had the power to change anything. The fear in her eyes was real. I had never seen her like this. "Mom, are you insane? Why didn't you tell me everything from the start? Why did you drag me into this?" I said. But she didn't respond. I could see her battling with herself, but I couldn't figure out what she wanted from me. At that moment, I realized she wasn't ready for me to grow up. To her, I was still a boy she needed to protect. But now, she just waited for me to make the right choice. What was the right choice? Hand over the money? Run away? Or fight them and risk both of our lives? The man spoke again, as if reading my mind. "I see you don't want to listen, but we won't wait forever. You'll have to decide. You can't stay on the sidelines. We've come for what's ours, and you know exactly what I mean." I began to realize that I couldn't run away from this. I couldn't just leave the money and disappear. I was now tied to this story just as much as my mother, and if I didn't decide what to do, things would end very badly for both of us. "Fine," I said, making up my mind. "I'll fight, but if I have to go up against you, I'll be ready." The man smirked, but there was a clear threat in his eyes. "You can fight, Jake, but be careful. And remember one thing. This game doesn't end until you decide which side you're on. You can't stop this process. Choose wisely." With that, he turned and headed for the door, but before he left, he threw one last warning over his shoulder. "And remember, Jake, you can't leave. You're in too deep now. And if you take the wrong step, it will be your last." When the door closed, I was left standing in the room. My mom, like me, didn't move. We stood in this nightmare, and I realized that this wasn't just about money. Our lives were at stake, and now I had to decide how to fight. I turned to her. "Mom, are you ready to fight? You need to tell me everything. We don't have time for secrets." She looked at me, and her gaze hardened with determination. I saw that she was no longer the weak woman she'd been just a few days ago. She had made her decision. "Yes, Jake, I'm ready. But you need to understand. We can't just hide from them. This is your fight now, too. And you're not alone."